an unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J.N. Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J. And as always, we have a fascinating show for you today. Today, especially with a very good friend who happens to be a very good journalist, researcher, filmmaker, and so much more. But first, let's give you some UFO news that literally some of them just came out a couple hours ago. The first one I'm going to read to you came from the Daily Express Light. UFO hunter claims another huge UFO mothership is drawing sun of energy from NASA images. We've heard that before. Whether it's true or not, I don't know how we could prove it, but nonetheless, it makes good fodder for good story. Here's another one. Now, I have an idea who's behind this, but I'm going to go ahead and tell the headline first, and this comes out of the Huffington Post. Your retired Air Force colonel claims new evidence will blow Rendlesham UFO sighting out. I personally believe that it happens to be Colonel Halt. I mean, what other retired colonel happens to be involved with Rendlesham that we know about? I mean, unless there's a new one that's coming out of the woodworks, that would be great. But if there isn't, my personal guess is it's Halt. If anyone wants to take a bet on that, that's where I put my money. Here's another one. Now, this could be a little arguable because there's a lot of great pictures. The title is Best UFO Picture Ever Taken by Hovermill Man. And this comes from Cambridge News, of course, in the UK. Now, a lot of people have amazing footage, and there's a lot of footage out there that is not real. That's the problem. These days, with HD cameras and everything being in 1080p, well, not everything, a lot of things being in 1080p and very good quality, there are a lot of good images that come out. The problem is, it's very easy to hoax them. So just because it's an amazing picture doesn't necessarily mean anything. But I'm not trying to discredit this. Everybody out there, Google it for yourself. Take a look at it. I'd love to get your feedback. All you have to do is go to drjradiolive.com and hit the contact button as you have been. Final piece of news for you. Kansas woman says UFO blocked out moon and stars. This comes from Open Minds, our good friend Alejandro Rojas. Again, for all you out there who keep sending the news reports, please continue to do so. They are very, very much appreciated and, of course, are a very integral part of this show. Now, let's turn to our guest. Like I said, he's a filmmaker, a journalist, a researcher, a lecturer even, so much more, and coined by Alejandro Rojas as the biggest thing to come to ufology in a long time. And I think you all remember that interview. That was back in January, and you haven't heard from him in a few months, but now you get to hear from the one and only Jeremy Kenyon Lockyer Corbell. Mr. Corbell, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dr. J, thanks so much for having me on this historic show of yours. You know, you're just preceding the great Art Bell, and you have interviewed some of the greatest individuals within this field. So I commend you for your work, and it's an honor to be on your show.
Thank you. Thank you. I really take those comments to heart. And I got to say to you, you've interviewed some of the people that are really the highest of the food chain. And that's one of the topics that we're going to talk about. Bob Lazar, someone who rarely ever gives interviews. You were able to get an interview from him. In fact, you even got a film about him, a bio, if I'm not mistaken. And the name of it is Lazar, the Cosmic Whistleblower. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a very short film, and essentially it's just updating people to hear what Bob had to say. This is actually before the International UFO Congress, and I, as just a fan of this field, was curious, as most people should be, about who Bob Lazar is, what it is that he talked about, and where he is today. I mean, that was the most important thing to me because, Lazar really created something. He is a pivotal individual in the field of ufology for good reason. And so, yeah, I have a little short film out there about him. It's just a few minutes of extra testimony that you haven't seen, but it's different when you hear Lazar talk in a very candid way. So the film itself, I'm really happy with right now. It brings people up to date and then gives them a little taste of hopefully what's to come with Lazar.
Well, one thing about Lazar, I remember when he first came out and George Knapp interviewed him and he was in silhouette. And I even then believed him as an 8-year-old. Then, of course, in 89 comes, then he finally comes out with his full name and face. And the details from his story from 1989 have never changed. He has never wanted to make a dime from this. He has never accepted any money. He's never written a book. And he still, to this day, does not want to be known as the UFO man. In fact, for those who happen to be at the UFO Congress, where they actually got to see you and Bob Lazar and George Knapp, in fact, who happened to be there. It was a great event. He again said, I do not want to be the UFO man. And that's why he stepped out of the woodwork. But really, his claim was so amazing. One thing that stuck out in my head that I think I'll never forget from the UFO Congress is when he said, when George Knapp asked him, do you think we've been able to reproduce these extraterrestrial vehicles? And he said, he pretty much laughed and chuckled and said, heck no. That would be equivalent of taking an iPhone and throwing it into a wagon train in the 1800s.
Correct.
And that really put a sentiment in my head because, that kind of makes sense. What do you say about that statement?
Yeah, I mean, look, I just need to throw it down really simply, which is this. Bob Lazar has told you the same story from day one. People tried to distract you from those issues. They tried to distract everybody from hearing what he had to say. Now, Bob is not somebody who's going to go defend himself to people like Stan Freeman. He could care less. But essentially, he has put on the table his story for you to understand and listen to. And I personally believe Bob Lazar for a variety of reasons. People that have come to me off the record and people that have come to me on the record. Bottom line is Lazar has never changed his story because he's telling it just how he remembers it. And yes, he is always misquoted and he is always distorted what he had to say. But he did say that, what you said at the International UFO Congress. He did chuckle. The idea that you could back engineer these craft, just the material science alone, it's laughable.
One thing that I love about him, and okay, just in general, psychology, when someone makes a lie and they want to continue or cover up that lie, let's just say they're having an affair, for instance, they have to continually create lies. And at some point, they're going to get caught unless they have an extremely amazing memory because of the fact that they can't keep up with their lies. Bob Lazar, in 26 years, actually 27 if you go back to 88, has never once changed his story. That right there is a very big thing to me. And he's not one to exaggerate. You've never heard him really speculate on say,
the opposite of exaggeration. I mean, he is really cautious with what he says because he's under the microscope all the time. But yeah, he does not elaborate. He does not exaggerate. He basically keeps it to what he experienced. And yeah, just the fact he hasn't changed his story, that is interesting. But more importantly, what he's tried to convey to people is a really simple story, and people have tried to distract you from that. They've tried to take you all different places, but the core of his story is what's important. I believe Bob Lazar worked at S4 subbase of Area 51 and was part of a back engineering program for extraterrestrial craft, and that's what Lazar claims.
And there happen to be, for those people out there, I mean, you'd have to be living under a rock if you've been paying attention to ufology. But the story of Bob Lazar is exactly what just Jeremy said. But moreover, he worked at S4, which was embedded inside of a mountain. So each of the hangar doors had sand on them to sort of look like the mountain. There were 9 hangar doors. He was only allowed access to one of them. And he labeled the craft because of the shape and the design as the sports model. And this was what's ringing even more true than anything else to me of how compartmentalized our military, or if you want to even call it that. Some people say it's sovereign, or private corporations that are really running this area or have possession of these crafts. He wasn't even allowed to the top level of this craft. He was allowed to levels 2 and level 3. That alone in itself, why would he make that up? I mean, that's just if you microscope and look at just that fact alone, that should say this guy is not lying, because
Yeah,
otherwise,
when people lie, they try to create these, elaborate worlds that make themselves the victor or themselves the hero. Bob has done the opposite of that. I mean, Bob has said, "I barely knew anything. I just was allowed to work on the craft a little bit, and we couldn't even back engineer anything." So yeah, it is funny. Like, if you're gonna make a story up about yourself, you make yourself kind of, the head person or the victor. And honestly, he's kind of the anti-hero in this story. So that is fascinating about Lazar, where people get hung up on his story. This is really bizarre to me. Where people get hung up is, nobody has ever been able to prove the educational credentials that Lazar has claimed. And, I have not been able to prove his educational credentials. Over 25 years, George Knapp has not been able to. But this is the thing that people bring up who are, want to kind of, stir the pot or try to discredit what Lazar is actually saying. And they say it as if it is, their own creation or discovery or like a gotcha moment that no one can prove Lazar's education. And in fact, it was George Knapp who was the first person who revealed to the world in his first news reports that he could not verify the educational credentials of Lazar, the very first news report. So people have been rehashing this for 25 years when it was the man, George Knapp himself, who originally brought it to people's attention. And I maintain a very simple philosophy on this. Bob Lazar could have been homeschooled for all I care. My point is, was he working in scientific capacity at Los Alamos in the 80s as a physicist? If I can prove that, then it makes sense that Lazar would have been picked up, cherry-picked in a way, from Los Alamos to work at a subbase of Area 51 called S4. And I think that we have by far proven this, even with the new witness that I brought forward. Even before that, I feel we proved it. But now the nail is in the coffin.
it absolutely is. And actually, I have a couple. First, I want to read a couple comments from the Twitter feed. Keith McDonald says, Bob is the real deal. As you and I both know, we wholeheartedly agree with that. Graviton Fish says, I've always liked Bob's story. Yes, his story has never changed. And another one for Michael Rad. He shows a little drawing of what Bob saw on the second and third level. Of course, he couldn't see the top level. And the MAG with the two stripes, the dark blue stripe and the light blue stripe. I guess his badge that worked there.
Yeah.
Again, these are all fascinating. Let me say a comment on the education. And this actually goes into my own personal life. First of all, you don't necessarily need to have graduated from an Ivy League school to go on to work at something like this, or you don't have to go to Harvard Westlake High School to end up at Yale University, or you could always do poorly in high school and end up, and this is why I'm going to relay my personal story. I wasn't doing that great in high school because my focus was on other things, including girls and everything else. The point being is I went to a few of them, and I ended up going to Pierce College, which a lot of people allege Bob Lazar went to. From there, I ended up going to UCSB. It's a good school, University of California, Santa Barbara. Then I went to a top law school. So I got my doctorate from there. Then I went and did some postdoctorate work at another school. So with that being said, when people say Bob Lazar was a C student in high school, so what? I was a C- student in high school. And look where I ended up in the education world. That's one thing. The other thing you said about Los Alamos, yes, if we could prove that, that is the basis of why he would be picked.
We have proven that. I mean, over and over. It's unbelievable.
It is, especially two things. First of all, there was a picture of him on the cover of the Los Alamos Times that showed Bob Lazar with his rocket car. And Dr. Teller appreciated that so much that, wasn't it him that actually invited him into the project?
Yeah, the way the story goes, as told by Bob and others, is that, he called up Dr. Teller, and Dr. Teller remembered him from that day that he was on the front cover of the Los Alamos Monitor. It happened to be a day that Dr. Teller was speaking at Los Alamos. So up comes Bob, walks up to Teller, sees him right before the lecture, and says, "Oh, that's me on the front cover." So, Teller remembered Lazar when Lazar called him and asked, basically for a boost to get a cool job.
And I think that's super fascinating because for those of you who don't know, Dr. Teller was the father of the H bomb. I mean, he is just as important, if not more important, than Dr. Robert Oppenheimer. And in that era, he was the big fish. And for him to ask to meet Bob Lazar, I think anybody, if you were anybody working at Los Alamos, and Dr. Teller summoned you to his office, wouldn't you be blown off your feet? I mean,
Well,
just
yeah, that's not exactly how it happened. Dr. Teller was sitting outside, and this is just how the story was conveyed to me. I wasn't there, obviously, but this is, Dr. Teller was sitting outside waiting to give his lecture, and up walks Bob. It happened to be the day that the Los Alamos Monitor paper was printed, and so in Dr. Teller's hand was a picture of Bob with his jet car, which is a kind of cool opener. It's a cool conversation opener. And so that's how that initial meeting, apparently, worked. But, look, let's get back down to the basics here. Whatever Bob did as far as education, again, I don't care if he was homeschooled. What I want to know was he working at the Maison facility at Los Alamos in scientific capacity in the 80s like he claimed? Everybody the detractors like to say, Lazar was a subcontractor, as if that means anything. Yes, he worked for Kurt Meyer. Yes, that's who employed him. But most people that work at Los Alamos are subcontractors. Again, it's a Mirage Men kind of thing to say. It's a sleight of hand, the shuffling of the shells, in order to say something like that. The point is, Lazar worked there in scientific capacity. We need to look at other aspects of his story, not the irrelevant ones. And that's what I hope people are starting to do. I personally was very skeptical of Lazar's story from the very beginning. I didn't look at it like a true believer. I looked at it like all these guys were conning me. That's when I started filming with John Lear, George Knapp, and then Bob. And honestly, I gave it a really critical eye. But I can tell you something. If these guys are conning you, this is the most elaborate con job on the planet, because sometimes these guys can't even coordinate phone calls, So I'm convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt, if I was on a jury, Bob Lazar is telling the truth as he knows it.
Yes, and I agree with that because, again, going back to what we said at the beginning of the show, he has never wavered from his story. And
No.
even at the UFO Congress, when pressed for more details, he wouldn't tell him. The only detail that I knew for the first time, which apparently was old news, I think you've already heard it years ago. I'm sure George Knapp probably knew it 25 years ago, was the way he got caught. And that happened to be about his wife. You want to tell that story?
Yeah, well, actually, the interesting story was that one of the things that he did reveal that was new, and it was so small, and I think that it was kind of bypassed by a lot of people. But if you noticed what he said on stage, and this really to me was fascinating because this was new information, which is that Lazar said the craft with the hole in it, right, where it had like the puncture hole in the side of it. If you read through all the Lazar lore and get caught up on what he's told everybody for the last 25 years, he never said this prior to the International UFO Congress. He said that one thing he knew was that craft was retrieved from underwater, or it came from underwater. So that brings in the whole idea of USOs and what the government is doing, retrieving a craft from underwater, and how Lazar knew that is anybody's guess. But that was new information, and I thought that was really fascinating because USOs are the kind of something that's not talked about as much as UFOs.
I'm really glad you brought that up. First of all, I got to say UFOs to me it's simply USOs are UFOs that just go underwater using the same technology, same propulsion, same everything. If you
Correct.
create a field around the craft, then obviously it's not going to get the friction from the water. But when
Right.
he said that one object that was turned on its side that had a projectile hole, as he described it, the first thing that came to mind was Battle of Los Angeles, because apparently two craft were taken down, one that landed in the San Bernardino Mountains and one in the ocean, off the shores of Santa Monica. Was this one of the craft that was retrieved there in the water? That's what hit my mind. But then again, apparently there have been so many around the world. I'm sure some that have been shot down into the water. It very well could be any other ones, but that's the only one I knew. But I thought that was very fascinating, and you're absolutely right. A lot of people didn't pick up on that, but because I've been paying attention to his story so much since the golden years, literally, that was new to me. But what was also new to me was the Tracy news, how he got caught.
Right. Okay. So that basic story, is I mean, look, it's a long story, and the best way to learn it is to listen to what Bob says, from watching the tape at the International UFO Congress. Just get the tape, listen to what he said. But yeah, I mean, essentially, I think what you're edging towards, Dr. J, is that, he was having relationship problems at the time. I mean, they stopped calling him in for work because they were suspect of his stability due to the fact that when they were tapping his phones, they could hear that his girl at the time was having an affair with the flight instructor that she had. And, at first he didn't know this. He didn't know why he wasn't being called back to work. But then they finally, when he kind of, messed up by taking people out to watch the test flights on Wednesday, right? From that point, they let him know. They let him know why they weren't calling him back and that he was in big trouble. Look, I have confirmations from so many sources that Lazar is telling the truth, that at that time of his life, he was terrified, that they were absolutely terrorizing him. I also want to touch upon the element 115. This is a very, very important aspect to the Lazar story, because people, even nuclear physicists that come up to debate me about this, don't know what they're talking about. And this really drives me crazy. What people say is, oh, there could be no way that there are 500 pounds of stabilized element 115. There's no way we humans can fabricate that. Well, guess what? Bob agrees with you. You should open your ears and hear what Bob said. From the very beginning, Bob said that it dumbfounded him that there was 500 pounds, which is not going to be that much, by the way. It's a super heavy element. So, we're talking, I don't know, if it fit in a laundry basket is what I was told. So, but, if you have 500 pounds of it, Bob told everybody, we as humans cannot stabilize this. We cannot create this. That allegedly there's this island of stability, this theoretical island of stability, where you could find the right isotopes to stabilize the element 115 so the half-life isn't so short, because the half-life of 115 is so short and it basically disappears. It degrades. So people throw this out as, Bob is a liar. He said there's 500 pounds of element 115. I'm a nuclear physicist. Well, guess what? From the very beginning, Lazar said that this was dumbfounding. Humans couldn't have made it. Most likely it wasn't fabricated at all. Most likely it was harvested and brought here. So people really need to listen to what he has to say if they're going to judge it.
That's right. And the devil is in the details. Actually, I have
Correct.
one more comment I want to read to you that just came through. This is from E.M. Rosa. Why has Stanton not commented on new witness Jeremy brought forward? Question mark. I'll tell you why. Because it means he'll have to apologize. I thought that was very fitting for what you've been saying. And you're
Very
absolutely
fitting.
right about what Bob Lazar said with element 115. That we can't create it. That was either given to us, traded with us. Regardless, the main fact is we humans weren't even at that level. I believe at the highest element at the time was what, 111, 112 or something like that. And only recently, I believe in the last few years, was it Germany, scientists there that were able to create element 115, but literally to this, a couple atoms worth, a few that size. I mean, there's no way they could make, enough to use as fuel. And so going back to 1988, when Bob Lazar, or 1989, when he started talking about this, people just assumed wildly, oh yes, that we're creating this, that's what bombshells the story, but they didn't listen to what he said. That's exactly what you
mentioned. You can try to twist and turn this story. You can Mirage-Men the heck out of it. You can try to mislead people into unfactual statements. You can do all of these things. Bottom line is, what Bob said stands. Now, if there's somebody who thinks the physics doesn't work for some reason, I would love to hear, their definitive proofs on why the physics that Bob explains doesn't work. That would be really cool to hear. But essentially what he said from day one is still really unchallenged. I mean, people throw out broad statements like, he doesn't sound like a scientist. What does that actually mean? And again, I want to remind you what your listener wrote into you just now, I thought was actually pretty funny. Dr. Krangle is the new witness. And what's so important about Dr. Krangle is that, let me just quote something he said. He said, "We all knew Bob Lazar committed professional suicide when he told about what he was working on for the military." Now, that's a direct quote. You can listen to that in the audio recording that I have on my website. Anybody can misconstrue or try to twist what Dr. Krangle said, but bottom line is, I think the interview stands for itself. Bob Lazar was working at Los Alamos in scientific capacity as a physicist in the 80s. And yeah, if people call him a fraud and a liar, they may have to apologize now for that.
Let's go ahead and plug in the site right now, even though we're going to do it again for people if they want to listen to it while they're listening or after the show. It's Extraordinary Beliefs is where everything can be found, correct?
Yeah, definitely go listen to it after the show. But
yes, exactly.
Go and explore extraordinarybeliefs.com, and on that site, I have a variety of films that are available and audio subjects and stuff like this. I think you'll really enjoy it. Support it. Go buy a t-shirt, buy a film, something, help it to thrive. But essentially, these are all my investigations into the bizarre and the unknown. It's literally like the Twilight Zone, except everything I research is 100% real.
And that's the scary part. Yeah, exactly. That's the scary part, that the truth is stranger than fiction.
Yes.
When did you come across Dr. Krangle? How did that come about?
Yeah, this was really interesting, actually. So I've set up a number of like web bots, essentially, that kind of spider the internet and look for keywords or phrases in certain contexts that may, relate to one of the cases that I'm working on. And sure enough, there was a little hit that I got. It was from a Facebook comment. And essentially, it was a guy that says, well, my neighbor worked at Los Alamos in the 80s and worked with Bob Lazar. And I was like, all right, well, let me find out more about this. So I found the gentleman. His name is Paul. He's a military individual, and he did actually grow up living next to Dr. Krangle. And, Dr. Krangle related this story to him. And so I asked Paul if he would, get me in contact with Dr. Krangle. I flew out to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Dr. Krangle had no idea what I wanted to talk to him about. Dr. Krangle is not a UFO guy. Dr. Krangle is just a scientist who worked at Los Alamos, White Sands, China Lake. I even have some of his documents from Homeland Security. He proved to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is a scientist working in scientific capacity at Los Alamos starting back in the 80s. So with that as the base or the foundation, I then started asking him about, well, did you know a guy named Bob Lazar? And I was fascinated with the detailed description that Dr. Krangle gave to me about seeing and knowing Bob Lazar in security briefings at Los Alamos in the 80s. And then after that, within the scientific community, especially in those secret bases and places they're working in high security, where he was explaining to me, again, his quote, "We all knew Bob Lazar committed professional suicide when he told about what he was working on for the military." So again, it's just fascinating that Dr. Krangle was not a UFO guy, but was willing to talk with me about his memory of Lazar. And all Lazar really had to say was, "Oh, it's nice to be remembered." Classic Lazar.
I actually feel really bad for the guy because he did commit suicide in that sense, and it took him a while to actually repair his image, and that's why he decided to not do as many interviews, and that's why he was hiding in the woodworks. And this is the ironic part. This is to show how little one side of the government doesn't know the other side of the government, what they're doing. He's still doing military contracts on one hand through his company United Nuclear, but on the other hand, they were shooting at him in 1988. They were chasing him, they were threatening him, and they're telling him to be quiet, but yet here he is doing, creating stuff for whatever it be for the government. I just think that just blows my mind when you think about that.
Yeah, it's amazing. Look, it's easier just to listen to people that purport to be some sort of UFO, authority. It's easier just to listen to people like that and repeat or parrot back what they say than it is to do your own research and your own asking and try to make your own calls and form your own opinion. And so this is kind of the situation here is that, if you got somebody who's of high credibility within the UFO world and they just continually bash somebody for personal reasons, people start to believe that. But bottom line is that there's no weight in it. The weight is in the facts and the evidence. And that's what's really interesting. If you look at the whole picture of Lazar, not just isolate one or two things that help you prove your standpoint, but instead look at the entire story of Bob Lazar, you will find within this story one of the most compelling, intriguing, and powerful UFO stories of all time. Lazar is the cosmic whistleblower. In my opinion, his story is profound for human consciousness. I mean, this is an important story.
Here's two more quotes or from the listeners. One, actually, I see you responded to one. This is from Keith McDonald. I'm going to say it on air. People mincing Bob's words on element 115. How dare they? It came from somewhere else. Simple as that. Another one. The odd thing about Lazar, this is from Shayna. Now he says, perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps need to know basis is better. And then Lou Sheehan, another is that element 115 is an island of stability. It isn't. The most stable form lasts 220 milliseconds. I thought that was really interesting.
So if that person's saying that what we know right now is element 115 will only last milliseconds, I believe that's what you just read, is that somebody is saying, basically that's BS and that element 115 only lasts milliseconds. Sure. That is currently what we know about element 115 with the isotopes that we currently know and have been able to test. But 115 supposedly has another element, another isotopic composition that may stabilize it. That's the theorized island of stability. So just because Earthlings at this moment only know one thing doesn't mean that's the way that it is. So I'm going to argue that point and say that there is a lot yet undiscovered, and that it's very possible element 115 in a natural environment, could be stabilized. Don't limit yourself.
I also, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe for his safety, I'm sure he's holding stuff back and that he does.
He is.
And he even said, I believe for a History Channel interview 10 or 11 years ago, he said, I cannot wait for all this to come out so I can essentially...
I remember that, Dr. J. That's a really interesting point. And I don't know that a lot of listeners will be super attuned to it like you were, but there was a documentary. And in that documentary, I mean, we saw a fighting Bob Lazar. We saw a guy who was eager to get this out. He was eager to fight back and tell people, you saw that. That was a fascinating little quote that he had. I mean, I almost missed that myself. And that's not the way that Bob has acted over the years, or acted over the years. So I'm wondering what changed, or, it's possible he just doesn't want the attention. I mean, that's kind of what I sense from him.
That's what I think is probably the correction in that sense. You're probably right, because he doesn't want to be known as the UFO guy. But here's something that I've always wondered. First of all, does he have children? And do you think his children know? I'm sure if they just Google Bob Lazar, they could probably find out his story. Do you think they're probably saying, Dad, stand up for this, go out and fight and tell us the truth and tell the world what you know? Do you think any of that's happened?
Well, first of all, I would never comment on somebody's, personal life. I think that's nobody's business, not even mine. If I have children, I don't have children, that's not the issue of UFOs, So, but I understand that the idea of your question, which is how do the people closest to him react to his story? That's what I feel like you're really asking,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, I would say, I found that very compelling. I think I'll just make a broad statement on that. Again, only Bob knows Bob Lazar. The only person that knows him better, or knows him as, closest is probably Gene Huff, his best friend. I certainly am not his good friend, but you've got George Knapp, who's known him for a quarter of a century. But, so all these people for all these years, Bob has told them his story. And what I did notice is the family that did come to the International UFO Congress, they all knew Bob's story. But to them, he's just Bob. So they all did know his story. And of course, they all know it to be true in their own way. And so I'm sure the question comes up, but yeah, Bob tells the same story to the people closest to him as he does to the public.
Here's another interesting quote from the Twitter feed. This is from Graviton Fish. What's really a kick in the teeth is that they had to add 115 to the periodic table after Bob's announcement. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not sure that they had to add it to the periodic table after Bob announced it. That doesn't sound correct to me. I believe 115 was a theorized element that they knew existed out in the universe, but we had never actually manufactured before. I think element 115 was a theorized element on the periodic table way before Bob Lazar. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty positive that's right. Additionally, after it was synthesized here on Earth, of course they had to put it on. So, look, I've heard story that when it was being attempted to manufacture the 115, that they, of course, did call Bob Lazar. and they asked him some questions about it. So I found that really fascinating. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
One thing I found really, really interesting about, you're absolutely right. Bob Lazar talked about that the element 115 was theorized, and he even said that it was the only one that it can be bombarded. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not using the correct words for this. That it can be bombarded and give 100% energy back. Again, I'm not a scientist. I'm not using the right words, and it'll turn to element 116 and go back to 115. But then he made another quote. If that they were theorizing element 115 existed further down the chart, it also existed even further, a similar reaction somewhere, I don't know, in the 180s, maybe the 200s, that I don't recall. But he definitely said there's a second time that same reaction happens. And I thought that was really interesting to have that kind of knowledge. And this goes down to his basic fundamental knowledge of science. If he knew such details, that's what kind of person you would expect to work at a place like this. You could ask him a question about, isotopic ratios and all these other stuff, and he could answer them.
Let me tell you something real. This is a little analogy. Bob Lazar is not a scientist. That's what people like to say, who are trying to dissuade you from listening to the evidence. Now, I'll just give you a personal story. When I was investigating the elemental composition and the isotopic composition of Object 17 from Dr. Lear's last removal surgery, when I was getting those analyzed at the labs and kind of going over the data, I was way outside of my depth. And so I had to ask different scientists to look at the data and try to help me analyze it, interpret it, and understand it. Now, Lazar is, a no-nonsense, no BS, one of the most skeptical people that I know. So I did show him those elemental and isotopic analysis that I got from the labs, and he was able, and he decided to give me kind of his 2 cents on it. Now I'm not saying he believes in any of this. I'm not, he is the first person to put his hands up and say, I don't believe in, the implants and stuff like that. I don't know what he believes, but for the sake of my film, I wanted to run it by a few scientists. Bob Lazar was the most helpful scientist that I showed the elemental and isotopic combinations or compositions to. He was the most helpful. He showed me research papers on zinc isotopes that were buried in the web. So people that say Lazar's not a scientist, clearly they have no idea what they're talking about.
I agree with you because how can you have someone who is not educated in the sciences comment on the sciences? And I think that's one of the disservices that have been done with the skeptics or anybody that's trying to take down the story. You really have to look at everything as a whole, including his knowledge
Yeah,
of
you can't just
everything.
cherry pick. You can't just cherry pick and say, well, I can't prove that he went to MIT, or I can't prove that, he did this or that, or he was probably a subcontractor at Los Alamos, so he could have been a janitor. What a just a pile of BS. I mean, it's like you can't just cherry pick the facts that are convenient to your theory. You need to look at everything. And that's what I really hope that the listeners on your show, I know there's millions of listeners, and I know that people really, are intelligent and eager to learn more, so they should do their own research.
Absolutely. They definitely have to. And you're right. If someone was a janitor at Los Alamos, then why would he have been picked to work at S4 and would be able to answer such scientific questions that even some of the most advanced people or educated people in other fields couldn't answer unless, of course, they were scientists?
Look, it's absolutely ridiculous. And people that keep saying it, it's because they just have their fingers in the ears, and they don't want to, deal with the truth. Let's focus on what Lazar did tell us. And this is what's important to me. Lazar said that our United States military has a subgroup that is back engineering and physically trying to replicate non-terrestrial off-world technology from non-humans. That this is being done in 1989. You can sure bet that it's being done now. With what success, we don't know. Where the projects are now, we don't know. But essentially, that this is the core statement. S4 being a subbase of Area 51, all of this is interesting, but the core is that non-human intelligence made craft that traverse space-time, and that our government, or a subsect of our government, is trying to reverse engineer them. And that is what is important in what Bob Lazar said.
Exactly. And I think the fact that somebody just wrote to you again, Graviton Fish. It says, "Thank you, Jeremy. I didn't realize element 115 was theorized before Bob told us about it." And I knew that because, just as you mentioned, you and I have both been paying attention to each and every one of his details going back to the 88, 89. As you pointed out, to that 2004 documentary, we saw a very defensive Bob. He really wanted to come out, to a more calm Bob in 2015 saying, who almost wanted to get out of it. I remember him saying at the UFO Congress that he almost pulled out of it, yet they threatened to sue him, and that's why he came through.
He definitely did. I mean, look, he it appeared to me on all levels that it was uncomfortable. I mean, I don't think Bob understood, or understood at the time, maybe he does now, that, in 25 years from when you first came out and talked, I mean, he has never been paid to go talk at some UFO conference. He never started making a living like other people, just, going around talking, which he could have easily done. But, he never did that. So it was almost as if he didn't understand how important his testimony was. 25 years, you have a completely new generation. You have people that were 1 year old when Bob Lazar first told this story, and then they're like 24 years old now, or 25. And they've never heard it directly from the horse's mouth. And so this is what was so powerful about Lazar coming to the 2015 International UFO Conference, or Congress, was that people could hear it directly from him at a later date. And it's a different thing to hear, like, a man who's a full man, not a kid anymore like he was 25 years ago, talking about it. And the only reason he came to that event to talk was because of George Knapp and Gene Huff. I mean, they really kind of compelled him to tell his story again. In 25 years, he had never done that. And that was really important. I found it to be very significant. It shows that some part about him cares that the truth.
I didn't know Gene Huff was there, but there was also an aviation journalist whose name I'm forgetting.
Jim Goodall.
Yes, yes. I couldn't believe when they announced that he was in the audience, because he was one of the people that was first talking about, the things at Area 51. And I think
Well,
just
so,
the fact
yeah.
that he came to see Bob Lazar and George Knapp was really fascinating.
Well, so I had lunch with Jim in Los Angeles just after the event, a couple days after the event. And I spent this is a 4-hour lunch turned into dinner, right? And Jim Goodall is one of these kind of patriots who used to hang out down at Area 51, or the whole Nellis complex, Area 52, Area 51, and he would look for and try to find the newest, most badass stealth technologies. And this is what he was interested in. And he actually, over time, developed a friendship with Ben Rich, who was the head of Lockheed Skunk Works for many, many years. During that time, he was also friends with John Andrews from the Testers Corporation, who made the models of the stealth fighter and even Bob's UFO, even the saucer. So Jim Goodall would hang out with John Lear, with Bob Lazar, even before Bob Lazar was Bob the UFO guy. So he knew Bob when Bob thought that all of this about UFOs was a figment or a construction of human imagination. And this is what was so interesting. I said, Jim, do you believe Bob? And, for two reasons he believes Bob. First off, he says, I knew Bob before Bob was ever interested in UFOs. And I remember this one time I was driving Bob home in a car, and Bob said to me, I feel really bad for Lear. And Jim Goodall says, what do you mean you feel really bad for Lear? And Bob said, well, John Lear. He's the son of William P. Lear, the inventor of the 8-track stereo. Lear Jet, he's from an aviation family. And this poor sucker believes in UFOs. And so this was Bob's kind of attitude before, was, he felt bad for John Lear for believing in UFOs. But then obviously after working at S4 and after coming into contact with a craft, which, by the way, he thought was American. There was an American flag on it. He thought that the saucer was American until he got let inside, and all started kind of making sense. I mean, the seats were too small for humans, this sort of thing. So again, you have to put in perspective. Jim Goodall, American patriot, a guy that was looking at these secret craft as they were coming into Area 52, Area 51, taking photographs, friends with Ben Rich, friends with John Andrews from the Testers Corporation, where he's getting information on how these craft look, knew Bob Lazar before Bob ever worked out at S4. And Bob was not a believer in UFOs, but that sure changed when he was asked to work on them.
I have a few comments to make. First of all, you're absolutely right. A lot of people forget that Bob Lazar was an absolute skeptic. When Gene Huff or John Lear would talk about it, he would just say, that is horse crap. That is not true. People are tinfoil hats. It's all nonsense. And literally, you're right. It wasn't, even when he started the project, just like you said, he thought, oh, well, this explains all the UFO sightings. This just is an advanced form of fighter. That's the exact quotes he used, until, like you said, he looked inside. And then the other thing I want to say is Ben Rich. Very, very important person, the head of Skunk Works. He had some really amazing comments when he spoke at the UCLA, I think the graduate for the engineers, the graduate department, the alumni speech. He made a speech there. He said two things. First, the last thing he showed was a UFO, or a flying saucer flying off. And he said, we have technology in the Nevada desert that would make George Lucas envious, was one of his famous quotes. The other quote was that we now know how to take ET home, or we now have the technology to take ET home. That coming out of the guy who worked on the SR-71 and everything else that came out of Skunk Works. I mean, you really have to accept that or take that with a lot of gravity. I mean, that's a very, very serious statement from someone very important. That's not just someone off the street. I mean, this is someone in a very, very high position who would be exposed to classified secrets. Another person you mentioned, John Andrews from the Testers Corporation. The Testers Corporation had a reputation for creating models of things before they became released. So, for instance, they had I think a model of the stealth bomber or the stealth fighter. Then you see it, officially announced on TV and test flown. Same thing with the sport model. They released this, as Bob Lazar is talking about it now. Unfortunately, we've never actually seen it quite yet, but that's the reputation they had. So the insight knowledge John Andrews has, I think, was really important. Finally, I'm going to leave you with a question, and this is from a listener, from EM Rosa. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to let you. I do know the answer, actually. I'm going to let you say it though. It says, I'm kind of confused. If Lazar said we can't replicate off-world vehicles, then is the vehicle he showed Lears something learned to fly and not was something we just learned to fly and not built?
Yeah, it's actually a really important question. So again, if you just listen to what Bob Lazar has said all these years, no, we cannot replicate the technology. We do not even have the material science currently that can be used to replicate this technology. It is so far advanced from human technology that we cannot make it now. And that's not even the element 115, which would need to be harvested most likely, from another supernova or someplace where it's abundant naturally in a stable isotope. So no, we cannot replicate it according to Lazar. Now, have we flown them? Well, you have to really read between the lines here. Lazar saw 9 craft. One did have a puncture hole. The others look like they came right off a factory line. So you got to ask yourself, where did we get them? And then additionally, were they given to us? Or is it something that we commandeered somehow? Most likely, they were given to us. But the question is also, where did we get the 115? If we can't make it, where did we get it? And so this is kind of where the speculation comes in. Maybe we've learned in limited capacity on how to fly these. Maybe. But again, Lazar never saw who was inside of the craft when he saw the test flight from the lake bed, when he came out and watched it lift up. He didn't see who was piloting in it. So, it throws a lot of questions at you all at one time.
It absolutely does, and especially about its test flight, which we'll go into. I got 2 more comments I want to read for you. One, I think you've already seen here. This is from Observer at Pat Pow. I believe Bob Lazar's story. I've never had any doubt, nor that the U.S. government would do what they did to him. Frankly, I'm surprised he's still alive. Here's the other one. It says, Dr. J said Bob is working for military at present, so the military should have assured of his scientific background to hire him. Absolutely. If they're subcontracting things from United Scientific or United Nuclear, of course they would verify that he's capable of producing the products.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's astounding to me. Like, something else that people don't know is even when, compartmentalization, even when Bob was in so much trouble with this one faction of the United States military, he still had the contracts at Los Alamos to fix the radiation detectors. So it's so compartmentalized, and also they can't acknowledge, where he was working at that time. That's what's so fascinating. Do you remember the court case that came up? He was indicted for putting up cameras in a brothel. Did you hear about that?
Yes, and he couldn't verify his employment, right?
Right, and that's what's so interesting, right? So they asked him, so let me, they had this whole thing where he had to basically, tell them everything, so where did you work before and blah, blah, blah. And it turns out the judge and everybody was saying, you're holding back from us. We can't verify your employment. And Bob's like, yeah, I know. That's been a problem for years, So they essentially got, I think it was a senator to write in and try to get his FBI, military files, tried to basically get the government to cough up that they knew about Bob Lazar and his past employment on the Nellis Range. I mean, how great would that be for us if we got confirmation because he was in a litigation or whatever it was because of putting up cameras in a brothel, which I find really hilarious. But what happened was they didn't say, we have no record of Bob Lazar, which is obviously what they would say if somebody didn't have any record. They would say, we don't have record. Instead, they said, You don't have a need to know. Now, that was so dumbfounding for the judge and for the whole case, from what I understand, that there's actually this really interesting quote I don't have in front of me, but from the judge basically saying, in the history of my being in law, I have never, been responded to like this. So it's just it's another little tiny leaf on the tree that shows Lazar is not going to go through all these shenanigans to maintain some stupid lie he did 25 years ago.
Exactly. He would not face going to jail and being
Yeah.
held in contempt of court
Exactly.
for a hoax.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Let me make something other clear. This goes back to the question earlier that I was saying about the government verifying a scientific background. If you go to unitednuclear.com, if that's the website, or just Google United Nuclear,
Yeah.
you will see when you place an order, it says your order may take several weeks to be completed because government orders are priority, or they're essentially, they take precedent over your order. I mean, so that just shows you that even to this day, he's continually getting them. And even to this day, you can place an order which should be coming in a week or two, but may come in 2 or 3 months because they'll get an order the day after for the government, fulfill that first. And literally, there's a whole explanation about that. So
Yeah, so that's really funny. I mean, so let's get into that for 1 second. So, Bob's website, United Nuclear, that's his, scientific equipment and supplies company, and it's super cool. I've actually a lot of my friends that work in nanotechnology buy stuff from his, website all the time. It's pretty cool. But the thing is that he has been running this business and has had government contracts. So one thing I said in what they call a debate at the International UFO Congress, which I didn't even know was going to be a debate. I was just there to talk, and they asked me all these questions about Lazar, and had Stan Freeman up there, and I just kind of was like, what is going on here? But essentially, one of the things that Bob was doing that I kind of made a point of telling everybody, because I was able to learn this, he was building these neodymium, which is rare earth, powerful magnets, and he was building these wheel housings essentially for hovercrafts for the ball bearings. And it was because the Navy was using these hovercrafts on the sand, and the sand was just getting sucked up into these, into the ball bearings, or where the ball bearings sit inside of the hovercraft. So Bob got the contract to use these neodymium magnets to expel the sand, which is one of the coolest things I ever heard. And then additionally, he was got the contract to paint ants with these radioactive isotopes, but he had to find exactly the right isotope where you're not going to kill the ants from radiation, but that they would still kind of project the isotopes so that they could be read, essentially, so that they could be monitored. But I mean, just cool scientific work, very different than just sitting on UFO circuits and traveling and writing books about UFOs. No, Bob is an active scientist.
That's right. And that's what people forget. And we come back from break. I have a listener question. I want to talk about nanotechnology. And we didn't even get into patient 17. And we have so much more to talk about. Everybody stay tuned. We'll be right back in just a couple short minutes.
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
Welcome back to Hour 2 of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, you are listening to me, Dr. J, and our good guest, Jeremy Kenyon Lockyer Corbell. First, let's do some housekeeping. Of course, the website, drjradiolive.com, drjradiolive.com. Of course, you can listen to the show there, listen to our show, and then stay on to listen to Art Bell. Of course, you could also see our old YouTube posts of the old videos. This show will also be archived there. I have been away for a while, but I am catching up on them all. They will all soon be up. What is up, though, is Jack Osborne, and that actually relates to Jeremy Corbell, because if you recall, within his first few sentences, he actually talked about Jeremy Corbell and his movie. I think that was really fantastic. Also, we are launching an affiliate store. So several of our guests have books and other products that we are selling at a discount. For instance, Preston Dennett, all of his books are sold at 20% off their cover price. All those will soon be up there. One major thing that hasn't been posted yet is David Sarita's meditation course. That is offered at a big discount. You will see the details of that at davidsarita.net. But in the meantime, go there. But soon you'll see it on drjradiolive.com. And like I said, all the interviews are catching up. Linda Moulton Howe's from last week will also be up. Tonight's will be up in a few days, and all the missing ones will be up. If anybody out there has one that they're really waiting to hear, just reach out to me. There's a lot to do. Of course, with Art Bell being back, there's even more to do, but I will get it all done. Before we return back to our interview, I would like to return to our guest and ask him for some details on all his amazing work. Jeremy, let's talk about your websites. First of all, I know you said everybody can just go to extraordinarybeliefs.com, and you want to sort of centralize everything there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have a large, online presence with, a variety of films and topics, but everything is found at one place, and that's extraordinarybeliefs.com. And, from there, you can search into all sorts of different projects and investigations that I'm working on. But yeah, that's the one central place because, it is my understanding that, in order to be a witness of the world, you have to take in these extraordinary beliefs and people that think outside the box. And so that's what that, website is about. And that's the primary location for all of my films.
Well, let's talk about some of the names of the films so people can actually, we're going to go into detail, especially with Patient 17, and talk a little bit more about Bob Lazar and, of course, anything else. But let's, right now, while we're plugging in the website, let's tell people some of the names of the films. I know for sure the Patient 17 is an incredible film. That's available there, right?
Yeah, so right now, actually, this is the first time after, many years that I actually have films available for people to rent and watch. So right on my site, if you go to the first page, there's a little teaser trailer there about extraordinary beliefs. But then I have Nano Man, Utility Fog, which is a film where I take a nanophysicist, friend of mine, who gave me an anomalous material that he claimed was, nanorobots fabricated on the nanoscale to a degree that, human beings could not fabricate it. And he gave me a vial of what looked like water, just looked like liquid. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do with this? How do I get this analyzed? And he says, well, scanning electron microscopy. And I said, well, great. How do you do that? And he says, well, let me set you up with NASA. So I got an all access, unrestricted pass to film at NASA as they are analyzing with this one tech this anomalous material. So that was a really, really fun experience. And there's a short film called Nano Man that's available on the website. Additionally, I have the short film Lazar, Cosmic Whistleblower. I have the feature film that you're talking about, Patient 17. And this is, I'm calling it a pre-premiere. It's available right now, but it's not going to be available for much longer. This is so I get about, 100 people to view it, kind of watch it, and give me some feedback on what they thought. So the film is rentable at this time. I reserve the right to make it better at any time. But right now you can watch, Dr. Lear's final, alleged implant removal surgery. But more importantly, you can also watch Patient 17 on the kind of emotional roller coaster of being the guy that this was taken out of. And then look, on my site, there's a bunch more films, other things to see. Just go explore it. Take some time and check it out.
Utility Fog. I thought that was really fascinating when you showed me the little preview of the guy talking about atoms that literally sizes of atoms that have joints. That just blew my mind. That is nanotechnology.
Yeah, like atomic printing. The only way that you could it is similar to molecular printing. One day we will have this capability. We do not have this capability at this time, but the idea of printing essentially molecules or printing atoms, the idea of making something on such a small nano scale, a technology that can self-replicate and then can also act from some sort of control system. It can act from a central intelligence where it works as a whole, where all these individual pieces work as a whole. That's the theory or the idea found in science fiction called utility fog. So that's what I called the movie, because this is essentially what the scientist is claiming. And by the way, where he got this anomalous material is from a UFO related location. So, you can think of a landing site or an abduction site, that sort of thing. So I'll reveal more about that once I know what it is that I have. And it's an ongoing investigation.
And I think that's what puts you on the map and really puts you at the top. Really, that you remain skeptical until you have more evidence, and you always leave it at that. You don't speculate, and when you speculate, you say you speculate, but you don't exaggerate on your findings. And one thing, going back to relating to what you just said about utility fog and nanotechnology, this goes back to something Bob Lazar said at the UFO Congress. If we are able to alter gravity, then everything that was science fiction in the morning will be thrown away and become science fact that afternoon. Things such as time travel, force fields, wormholes. I just thought that was one thing that blew my mind. And of course, when I think of utility fog, that jumps into my mind as well. And when you said alien sites, of course, I wonder, did it come from a crash and retrieval?
Right. And so these are, as a friend of mine would say, big questions and sometimes disturbing answers. Like, these are the big questions. And yes, if you can manipulate gravity, then everything changes. If there was truly a way, as Lazar claims, to amplify a wave of gravity, to even detect it, is the issue we're having now as humans, right? But if this is true, and there's gravity A and there's gravity B, and that there is a wave that can, like any wave, be amplified, it is an absolute game changer. And that's what's important about Lazar's statements all the way back from 1989, is that what he describes is absolutely genius.
It is. It absolutely is. And he described it as the missing pie for humankind. And one thing I love that he also said is that it's in the hand of the military, and it really sucks. It really sucks that it should be out there in the hands of all these scientific communities, the civilian scientific communities. That way, really, the really technical people, the ones that have the most information, could get their hands on it and analyze it, rather than a select few that the military has chosen who may not be as qualified. I think that's a very, very major point. I have a listener question that carried on from before the first hour that we never got asked, that I'm going to ask you now. It says, so as Lazar speculated who flew the vehicles, does he actually believe we have ETs working with or captured?
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult place to give you a direct answer. If you go back through the catalogs of what Lazar has said, again, Lazar's not the kind of guy to speculate either. I mean, that's what's so funny about his personality, is he'll tell you what he saw, what he knows, and then when it comes to what he doesn't know, he's just going to tell you, I have no idea. But, clearly these craft were created to be operated by intelligent beings who are non-human. And that's everything from the scale of the actual seats within the craft to just the actual technology of the way that the writing popped up on the inside of the craft wall when it became translucent and Lazar was able to see outside of it. Again, a little known fact, when he went inside, they did activate one of the walls and he could see outside, and there was scrolling language. There was scrolling looked like hieroglyphics that were going across the screen. So obviously this was made for non-humans. So now, do we have non-humans that we're working with? And is that why we have 9 craft? Is that why we have the element 115 in such abundance that obviously didn't come or was fabricated here on Earth? Or is this something that was retrieved at some point? Again, all speculation, no definitive proof. Depending on who you ask, you'll get a different answer. And I think Bob probably has the same questions that we do about these things.
One thing I thought really fascinating that Bob said or talked about was the honeycomb doors. How basically when they would collapse, that was a very, I can't really describe it. You probably know better about it, but he said essentially you would touch them and they would collapse and they would sort of create a honeycomb shape. Correct me if I'm wrong. Would you describe that in detail?
Yeah, well, I mean, so essentially there was, why this was so interesting, I think, to Bob and why it's fascinating, I think it should be fascinating to all of us, is because somebody once asked him, was there any technology on this craft that we nowadays could replicate? Because if we can't make any of this, like who cares? So and Bob came up with, he goes, well, yeah, there actually was one thing that we could probably pretty easily replicate on the in the mid level of the craft, which is the entrance level. When he went into it and reached down, there was like a little finger hole, a little hole you could put your finger in, and it was a collapsible honeycomb shaped, maybe hexagonal. I don't know the exact dimension of the geometry, but it was, yeah, like honeycomb. And you just kind of lift, and the whole thing would kind of collapse. If you're in those toy stores, how you have those balls that are really kind of small, and then you open them up and they get really huge because they're a bunch of geometry within itself. So these are, a children's toy. I imagine it's something like that. So that's how you access the bottom level of the craft, was through these kind of, pull or push hexagonal openings. And that's what allowed him to get down to the gravity wave amplifier, area, the bottom portion of the craft. So yeah, that's that technology, and why it was fascinating to Bob was because it was something we probably could actually make, as unprofound as that is compared to amplifying gravity waves. It's still pretty cool.
Another thing that you brought up that obviously I should have remembered from the beginning, a very detailed account from Bob Lazar about the gravity amplifiers, which also is another thing people need to take into account. If you're hoaxing something, how would you remember every little tiny detail? I mean, would you really create such an elaborate story and go down to the smallest detail of things? And he talked about these 3 gravity amplifiers, described them in shape. He said what they were: a small pipe hanging by a longer piece of pipe, and they could be independently swiveled. And he said that when they were flying, say, above Earth, one would be down to get it off the ground, and the other 2 would be swiveled up. Or in space travel, they would be flown, all 3 centered at one point, and it would be, I think, Omicron. What was the name of one of the positions where Delta
Omicron.
was Delta was the other one. I mean, those are just astounding details that really you have to consider when you take this new account.
Yeah, I mean, look, I am over the conversation, is Lazar making this up? And it's because I've just witnessed too much. The weight has become, the evidence has become weighty. I've literally just witnessed too much, of my own personal investigation into this to that's just not the case. I do have a quote that I'll read you. I've never made this public, but it's the opening of an audio interview that I hope to release to the public in the near future. But the opening of it goes like this. This is Bob Lazar speaking a couple years ago, and this is just to me in a home. And he says, I'm a scientist, and when I look at other questionable information or other interesting information, I have to follow the scientific method. And look, if it has to be reproducible and with proof, and look, I can't lay out the proof to make it unquestionably true. So he's admitting I can't lay out the proof for you to make it unquestionably true with the scientific method. So he said, so according to the rules of science, you're obligated not to believe it until I can. So he's putting the burden of proof on himself, saying, look, I know that I cannot prove my story. And it is the burden of proof is on me. So you should not believe me in the scientific method. This is what he's saying. So he says, yeah, I'm not saying believe the story. I'm saying this happened to me. I'm sorry I can't prove it. And without going back in time and bringing you there's no way. So let it be, is what he said. I don't really care if you believe it or not. It's just kind of a report of what happened to me. So this is his audio interview that he gave me a couple years ago in a private home. And that paragraph really says a lot to me. It says, Bob really doesn't care if you believe him. Bob knows that you shouldn't believe him with the scientific method because he cannot provide for you, undeniable proof. And also that it shows me that he just wants you to let it be. Like, it's caused him so much grief. And that's why sadly, that's why this story is so important, because we have a reluctant UFO messiah on our hands, you know?
Yes, yes. You're absolutely right. And I love that about him, that he actually did say, don't believe me because our laws of physics say you shouldn't. And I don't care if you believe me. I mean, that is not the work of someone who would want attention. He's doing everything to divert attention. I think
That
that's
is true. He is doing everything to divert attention, everything possible. Yet there must be something in him that finds this to be important enough that he'll go through the heartache and aggravation and having, former nuclear physicists kind of shake their fists at him, and try to dig up his past and make him, squat and cough, because basically, he's telling you what he experienced, and he has to go through all the grief of that.
I'm going to tie in something that you said prior to after we picked up from the break about Nano Man. I remember first seeing about him, unless he was the same person that showed you the utility fog, when he analyzed what was removed from patient 17. And now I'm going to segue to that. Patient 17, for everybody who's unaware of what that is, was the 17th patient Dr. Roger Lear, the alien implant surgeon, had removed an implant from, or alleged implant from. And I was there witnessing this. Of course, Jeremy filmed it, and there were several other people there. And as you heard a couple weeks ago, for the first time, he admitted this. That's where Jack Osborne, that's where I met him. He happened to be in the audience in the waiting room watching this on a big screen TV. And it took about 30 minutes for them to remove it because the object kept moving. And there are so many crazy anomalies to this. That's one thing that you really have to take into account. And I would love for you to go into the details of Patient 17, of why you decided to get that movie, why you decided to make that movie after all this debate going behind it, because there have been several documentaries made of Dr. Roger Lear and his implants before.
Yeah, well, I actually did, just honesty here, full disclosure, I had no desire to make this film. And it has nothing to do with, whether I believe, contactees and abductees and experiencers or not. It was just outside of my scope. It was not on my radar. I figured I had no way I could prove or disprove if any of this has validity or impact in our lives. But Dr. Lear made a point of, he hounded me. He really hounded me through my business partner with the Citizen Hearing, Ruben Langdon, the unsung hero of the Citizen Hearing, by the way, who made everything that you see possible when it comes to all the footage and the production. Anyway, Ruben got, Dr. Lear and I talking, and Dr. Lear just, was adamant. He's like, I've been doing this for decades. I know there's something to it. He had seen a little bit of my film work that I was doing on John Lear and this sort of thing. And, he was just like, will you please make a film on me? And, I was really hesitant, but then kind of final hour, and also because my business partner, Ruben, was saying it's worth it. Okay, I'll do it. But I said, Dr. Lear, if I find out that you're BSing, or if I find out that you're changing the analysis, or that anybody working for you is changing the analysis, I'm going to tell the truth. So are you sure you want me to document your alleged alien implant removal surgeries? And he said, heck yeah. He said, yeah, I do. So, he personally invited me to come film it and wanted me to make a film on his surgery process. So that's exactly what I did. Now, as we all know, sadly, Dr. Lear passed away. Everybody passes away, but it was just at a time when I got to show him a lot of the film, by the way, before he did pass away. I edited a whole bunch prior to that. But, it kind of left everybody in limbo. And from what I understand now, there's whole problems with the custodianship of the implants or these objects. So it really turned everything on its head, because there are just not many people, if any others, that are doing this sort of research honestly, with integrity, and with sincerity, like Dr. Lear was. So there I am standing at a 6'9", abductee who had an object removed from his leg, which everybody's convincing him is extraterrestrial, which, wasn't his initial thought. And I felt a responsibility to see it through to the end. And by the way, none of the research was getting done. People were not doing the science. They were not sending the object out for laboratory tests. It was driving me crazy. So that's when I took things into my own hands, talked with patient 17, talked with Steve Corbell, who at the time, and I think still does, had, access to the object. And I mean, it was hard. I had to basically convince him to send it to the lab, but we sent it to the lab. And we got 2 sets of data, very interesting results, isotopic and elemental analysis. Now, for good science, we need to do maybe 4 or 5 tests on the same sample, and the tests are destructive. And so this is what's sad to me. Patient 17 wants to learn more. I would like to have more in my film about more tests, but we are essentially not able to access the sample because there's so much hubbub going on around, who owns it after Dr. Lear passed away. And that is really sad. And essentially, I cannot conclusively say what it is, although in my film, it's very intriguing, and you'll see some of the results. To be conclusive, because we did get anomalous results, I did get results that showed zinc isotopes that were non-terrestrial. Now, the question is, was it a laboratory error? Or is this alleged implant actually extraterrestrial? And to know that, we need to do more tests. And that I found that to be extremely difficult.
You're absolutely right. And it's very sad that where the object is a mystery. Dr. Lear and I were extremely close, and the poor man just turned, I think he was just shy of his 80th birthday, or just turned 80 when he had died. And we were just starting to pick things up. We had 7 active projects in the works. One of his objects was about to be featured in a museum exhibit. Sadly, that fell through because he had passed away, and now we can't even access them. And you're right, we absolutely need to continue to work on these objects. Now, I had done 2 documentaries on him and his work, and it was the Alien Human Project Part 1 and 2, but they were based on the objects removed from the 15th patient and the 16th patient. And the reports were shown from there. And like you said, we need to send these objects to multiple laboratories, not telling them what it was, so they have no frame of mind or any nuance going in there and saying, well, this should, if they go in there thinking it's extraterrestrial, then they're already going to think tinfoil hat, or if they're a non-believer, you know what I mean? We
they're
cannot...
going to do one of 2 things. They're going to try to debunk it, or they're going to try to prove it. And that's not good science. You should, like I did, send it in without the lab knowing what it is. Just tell me, give me the facts. What do you see? What elements? What isotopes? Now, oddly enough, patient 17, there are about 35 or 36 different elements within this sample. It's a very small sample, the majority of which was iron, but it was highly complex and it was fabricated. And this is something that pretty much everybody agrees on. Now, the question is it extraterrestrial? And the way to know that is through the isotopes. If the isotopic composition is made from unearthly materials, isotopes not found here on Earth, then you know that it came from somewhere else. And wouldn't that be astounding? That would be like the smoking gun. Except science is not as clear-cut as people believe. Once you get results, you still need to interpret those results. And interpretation is something that can vary widely, is what I found. So some experts I talk with say this is absolutely standard. And other experts I talk with say this is the most astounding material they've ever seen.
I loved when in patient 17, what Nano Man's, his face, the expression, and his words when you asked him, what is this? He was just blown away at the isotopic ratios, at the elements. Arsenic was there. He said, isn't that poisonous for us? Right? That should kill us.
Well, actually, another thing that wasn't in the film was that I was in Los Angeles and I was at a pub. And I'm sitting next to this guy, and I happen to be reviewing the isotopic and elemental analysis, and I'm just going over it and trying to, look at it from a different perspective. It turns out this guy was near UCLA. This guy was a nanotoxicologist. How odd is that, right? Happened to be sitting next to me. So I said, hey, I have this 35 elements inside of this this analysis I got, and I just, from a toxicology standpoint, especially a nanotoxicology standpoint, are these dangerous, let's say, to the human body if they were contained inside the human body? And he's looking through the elements, and he's just shaking his head. He's like, oh yeah, this is not good. This is not good. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, you would not, let's just say you would not want these in your body. He goes, was this in somebody's body? And I said, well, in fact, it was in somebody's body. And he goes, oh, this is not good. You definitely want to get this out. And I was like, okay, well, is it going to kill you? And he says, well, look, he says, from a nanotoxicology standpoint, you don't want these amounts of arsenic. You don't want any of these heavy elements inside of your body. Absolutely, you'll have negative physical effects from it. He says, but it needs to be leaching into the body to have those negative effects. If somehow it was encapsulated where it wasn't leaching out into the body, well, then you're not going to have the negative effects. Certainly you want it out of your body, but if over 10 years, because I told him it was in a guy's body for 10 years before removal that we know of, 10 years that we know of, right?
Yes.
And so that was kind of his standpoint. And that brings you back to kind of Dr. Roger Lear's, thesis or his idea, which is that if these are off-world nano technology transmitters that somehow live off of the bioorganism of the body itself to energize them, then maybe, probably, these things being high or advanced technology, they were designed to not leach out any of the heavy elements.
We do have a caller. Caller, can you turn down your music in the background or your stereo? Let me just say one quick comment real quick. Even though I've made 2 documentaries on Dr. Lear, without being biased, hands down, Patient 17 was the best documentary ever on the subject. And that is literally, without being biased, without just saying you're my friend, literally, I have to admit that. So everybody out there see that. Area code 713, welcome to the show. What's your name?
Johnny. Johnny is my name.
Hi, Jordan. You have any questions for Jeremy?
Well, I got some questions. I was just saying that the UFO sighting, man, that we call it here in Pasadena, in Houston, we call it orange sighting, man. It's for real. Whoever it was trying to say it like that, he think he saw something. Well, we all saw something like that, similar to the same. It's like a very seriously orange sighting. And man, I'm telling you, we started being invaded. It was like 6, 7, 8 of them, about 9 of them, I think. But you did just like orange sighting, man. What in the world is that? And
when did you see your sighting, sir?
We saw this sighting, man. It's about 3 or 4 months ago, and we was out, and I thought I was seeing things. Everybody looked up and said, "Man, what the hell is this?"
What was the location of your sighting?
Well, the sighting was in Pasadena, Texas.
Oh, so can you say it again? What Texas?
Pasadena, Texas, I think he said, right?
Yeah, Pasadena and Houston, Texas.
And how many? And what was it that you saw? What were the shapes, sizes, and duration of your sighting?
Yeah, the shape that I seen on the sighting that y'all showing on what I see on my cell phone is the same sighting that we saw. Except I saw a lot more of the orange, of the orange looking sighting of that. It maybe been like 2 or 3 of them ships. I don't know, but that's definitely what we saw.
Very cool. So I guess you have something up on your website, Dr. J, that he must be responding to, which is some video or something. Is that correct?
He ain't. Don't think he ain't seeing things. Cause I know we didn't see anything, and I'm like, man, I'm not drinking. I'm looking at this. I'm saying, oh no, I'm the one saying, oh shit, we've been invaded. We've been invaded. Something that is not. It wasn't no balloons. It wasn't none of those little deals that they get mad or whatever. It was something that we could not describe, and I know it wasn't from here.
See, Jeremy, this is how disclosures happen. Jordan, thank you for telling your story. It's people like you coming out and telling your story. Billions of stories exist around the world of people having anomalous sightings in the sky. And if it wasn't for people like you, Jordan, telling your story, we wouldn't be telling this.
Friends that saw this, and I'm going to give them this number. When I see this, I'm going to let them say, man, remember that sighting that we saw that day? That orange sighting that we saw? I'm going to give them a number, and I'm going to tell you, they're going to tell you the same thing they saw. They saw the same thing, whoever y'all showing on this video. It's the same thing that we saw.
Well, thank you. You probably picked it up from the news on our channel, on our website. Do you have any? We have another caller. Do you want to hang tight? Do you have any more questions, or do you want to reach out to us.
People that he ain't the only one that saw that, and I'm telling you, I'm one person. I didn't believe in UFO, but when I saw that, I knew it was not from here. It wasn't no plane. It wasn't no helicopter. It wasn't nothing from here. I can guarantee you that.
Wow, cool. Thank you so much for telling us your story.
Yes, definitely. Mass sighting. Thank you so much for telling us, Jordan. Again, this is how disclosure is happening.
It's been seen, and I tell you, I got more witnesses to see them. When I get them these guys his number, they're gonna say, "Man, we was all outside, and we was at the club, but we looked. I said, what the world is going on?"
By all means, Jordan, get all the witnesses together. Go to drjradiolive.com and have them write to me, and we'd love to get this case investigated. Thank you for calling. Let's go to our next caller.
I agree with y'all on that because I tell you, I know I didn't see anything. I'm one person, I wouldn't,
Yes.
drinking anything.
Thank you, Jordan. We're going to go to our next caller, area code 717. Welcome to the show. What's your name?
My name's Lou Sheehan from Rancho Cucamonga. I have a couple of things for Jeremy Corbell, please.
Yes, by all means.
Okay. Jeremy, I'm the one who, and just be patient before you react too quickly. I'm the one who sent in the question about the stability of element 115, and your response is reasonable. I just don't know how likely that's a correct response. Another response could be that Bob was wrong. It could be element 120. I'm making that up. NOVA has a special on the element of stability probably being an element 114. And I wanted to share that. It's only about 14, 17-minute show done by Tyson, the black guy in New York City who's
Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yes. I wanted to share that with you and then ultimately perhaps talk to you about this elsewhere. Are you willing to give out your email address so that I or others might contact you?
Yeah, no, very much so. And I appreciate all the valuable information, and by no means is this a closed case. I mean, this is a very open case. And so we're all fascinated by the stability of all of these elements, or if 115 was in fact what Bob saw. He seems very confident that it is, but, as we all know, humans are not infallible. So,
correct. It'd be nice to nail that down just to cover your butt, his butt, everyone's butt. I mean, I'm a supporter, don't get me wrong, but I realize there's this little open, that's a very specific thing for him to assert, and it can be checked. And as you say, in theory, they could come up with another version with 15 additional neutrons on it, which is a different isotope. But that may I don't know how plausible any of that really is.
Well,
I would like you to see this video. Pardon?
Yeah, the fact is we don't know. I mean, all Bob is doing is reporting what he experienced or believes that he experienced. But the fact is that we don't know. There are a number of combinations, obviously that we've never tried when it comes to element 115. But even Bob has kind of made a point in saying that most likely this was naturally occurring, that it was stabilized somewhere and brought here. Now, I mean, if you're buying any of what Bob has to say, then that is plausible. But I'm very interested to see the documentary by Neil deGrasse Tyson on element 114. And my email for anybody, if you just email editor@extraordinarybeliefs.com, if you write a normal email, just an email to, in the subject to say, "Hey, Jeremy," it will get to me. So just editor@extraordinarybeliefs.com, and it will 100% get to me.
Okay, will do. All right,
Thanks,
I think you'll enjoy
Lou.
the video. It's very well done, actually. And Dr. J should watch it too. I know he's very busy, but I think he should watch it as well.
Oh, we will. I appreciate it, Lou. Just email me and we'll be in touch.
Yes, and you
Thank
got
you very
the
much.
email
Have a good
correct,
evening.
right? Editor.
I believe, yes.
Okay, excellent. Thanks again. Do you have any final questions?
Yeah.
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Good night.
Exactly. This is disclosure, Jeremy. This is exactly how it's happening. How the first caller, Jordan, called from Houston, Texas, or Pasadena in Houston, Texas, didn't believe in UFOs. All of a sudden, he saw about 9 objects in the sky. Was a complete skeptic. Sounded like he was definitely an older adult. Wasn't drinking. He said there's lots of other people. I believe we are living in a time, and I know this has been said decade after decade. I remember I started paying attention to this topic in 84. Everybody thought that the 40th anniversary of Roswell in 87 was going to be the year. Then, of course, the Roswell report, case closed in 94, came out. And then the 97 report, 50th anniversary, when they talked about the bodies, everybody thought that was going to be the year. Then, of course, the millennium, then 2012. And I figured if it doesn't happen in 2012, we're never going to happen. But now we are truly living in a world of alternative media where things that are normally censored can be told. And I think that is why you're hearing reports like that other caller, where we get a lot of these. And I get literally every day I wake up to emails of people that go to the site and talk about their experience, whether they've been abducted, whether they saw something, whether they've seen a series of things, whether they've captured something. I think this is truly a good time to be living in. And to have such a talented filmmaker such as yourself, I think is super fascinating. Now, we have less than 20 minutes of the show. So, of course, we could talk more about Patient 17, more about Bob Lazar, or whatever else you want. But I also do want to ask you this major question. What I knew 2 years ago when we were talking, or a year and a half ago, you mentioned you had several projects. I don't want to release the number that you told me out loud, but you told me you had several projects in the works. How many different projects can you talk about that you're working on right now that are in production in one way or another, whether pre-production, post-production, actual filming, or editing process, anything like that?
Yeah, well, essentially, if you go to extraordinarybeliefs.com, you will see about 12 film properties that are right there on the front screen. Each of those projects has a wide variety of footage already shot, and they're all in different phases of editing or release. So some of them are just trailers, some are short films, and then obviously, like Patient 17, some are feature films. When you get into all of the footage here, it's just a huge archive of footage. And what I can promise people without giving hard dates, because I'm a one-man show, it's just me doing all the investigations, doing all the filming, editing, funding, everything, is that I will consistently be releasing footage as I go. I mean, if I had an unlimited budget and I had a cave I could go into and my family wouldn't try to find me, I could probably edit a lot faster. But, we all know that, with life, you kind of have to go at the right healthy pace. So right now, if you go to my website, you've got 12 film projects up there. And there's a lot of content just to look at there. I mean, if you want to kind of support my work, then just go rent one of the films. I mean, that really does help, So go check it out. But there's everything from the entire world of nanotechnology to people that claim they can summon UFOs to people working on cold fusion, nano water filtration, whistleblowers who claim to be operatives from the CIA on their deathbed decided to talk to the camera. I even have some footage there in a tattoo shop where people talk about the paranormal and the unexplained. So there's a lot to see on the website. I spent a number of days with Dr. Edgar Mitchell. There's a trailer up under that one, Mr. Moonwalker is the name of that. I haven't really released that one yet, but there's tons of film up on the site. And look, I really want you, the listener, like that was really cool, by the way, when that caller Lou came on and gave me information about element 114. I really want to weaponize your curiosity. And people ask me, well, what does that mean? And honestly, they should be a little more curious to have to ask me that question. But essentially what I mean is I want people to become proactive, not to be just an observer in the field of ufology, but similar to kind of what you did, Dr. J, which is that you made a point of getting people, getting them to talk, bringing them on your show. Being proactive and contributing to this field is huge. So I ask that listeners contact me directly, and they can all email me at editor@extraordinarybeliefs.com and reach out to me with your stories and things that need to be investigated. And if I feel that it's within my scope, that I'll be able to amplify a true and real story, then I will make an attempt to do that. If there's nothing I can do for you, there's nothing I can do for you. But the point is, I want the audience to participate, so they're no longer the audience, but they're contributors.
I wholeheartedly and genuinely agree with you, and that's exactly what happened to me. I was a passive observer, watching every documentary, reading every book on UFOs or the paranormal. Literally, I remember my first job at 9 years old. I'm sitting there forcing my mother every weekend to buy these UFOs from some documentary in the LA Times Classified. And literally all my life, that's what I was doing. But finally, it was a few years back, several years ago, that I finally decided to become proactive. That's what it's going to take. Everybody out there, rather than being passive, listening in, if you've seen something, if you know something, if you have something, please share it with us. Share it with the world. Become active. And I'm glad you brought up Edgar Mitchell. He is an outstanding man, someone that you cannot, his credibility that you cannot take down in any way. Very unimpeachable in so many ways. The fact that he came back to Roswell, where he went to high school after he had been an astronaut, and everybody who was privy to the Roswell crash and retrieval came to him and talked about it. And then, of course, the last interview I did with him right here on this show, when he said that he thinks there could be an alien base on the far side of the moon or the dark side of the moon, I think is so fantastic. You can't take that. I mean, you can't make that up. You really can't make that up. The sixth man on the moon, the guy who actually walked on the moon, to say that there's possible aliens living on it, I mean, what else can you ask for?
Yeah, and look, I kind of want to bring people around to how we started this, which is that, I want everybody to participate, and that's kind of what we're talking about. But first, you really need to be educated, and that's the deal. So when you're reading these books and all these things you said you did, before participating, that was very important. That's a very important step. So you don't go into something blindly. So I would encourage everybody. There is a new witness in the Bob Lazar story, and that is Dr. Krangle. And if you go to my website, and you can find it right on there, it's, you go to the new podcast or whatever, that the recording is just on the website. But listen to what Dr. Krangle says about the Bob Lazar story, because remember, this is something we know to be true about Bob Lazar 25 years after George Knapp introduced him to the world. Because remember, it was George Knapp who brought this story forward. Bob Lazar remains a crucial and controversial figure in the field of ufology. I mean, to this day, he's more relevant than ever before. Nobody can deny that Bob is responsible for making Area 51 a household name. That was Bob. The reason you know the words Area 51 is because of Bob Lazar. That alone, renders him quite significant, but his importance, and Bob Lazar's importance in this world, could be extended vastly further. His testimony regarding his work back engineering alien propulsion systems, if true, it provides a substantial evidence that the Earth has been engaged by advanced off-world intelligences, and that the United States government has actively covered this up, and that is a monumental fact. That is a big deal. And so with knowing that, and knowing that that's what Bob Lazar said, and knowing that we got this new witness that verifies him working at Los Alamos, bringing us a little bit closer to the truth compared to the people that try to muddle the truth, I would say go to the website, listen to the whole interview, research the case, research about Bob Lazar, and then hopefully we'll learn more soon.
Exactly. And that's what people have to do. People out there who are just simply curious, you got to do a little more than that by actually not just paying attention to what mainstream media sites or mainstream media television programs have, because they're not going to really tell you everything. For instance, Patient 17, I doubt would ever have been shown on mainstream television because of the implications. There are so many things that are on Jeremy's site, or that are talked on this program, or on Art Bell's show, or so many other related shows that you're never going to hear elsewhere. And this is exactly why people out there who you have a curiosity in this topic, or any paranormal topic, which I believe is probably all related to some extent. As Robert Morningstar says, it's not conspiracies, it's one big conspiracy. Just like Thrive, the Foster Gamble, he was able to link every single one up. I thought that was super fascinating. We are running close to out of time, but we do have one more caller. Area code 978. Welcome to the show. What's your name?
I go by Who Took My Mojo. You could call me Mojo.
Mojo, can you turn off the radio in the background and go ahead and ask a question if you got to Jeremy?
Okay. I just wanted to say sorry about that. I can't shut that tablet off. How's that? Is that better?
Yes, by all means.
I just wanted to say it's great to hear your callers' energy, and I believe that people go out there, they're going to see. I mean, I definitely believe that the ETs are trying to share with us things, so it's just great if people got out there and seen for themselves.
I agree so. Jeremy, wouldn't you believe that I think they're probably trying to show more now than ever?
Yeah, I am still a very skeptical person on many levels about the details of this strange phenomenon that we call ufology. I don't think that I know the answers if these are extraterrestrials, interdimensionals, extratemporals. We don't know what we're dealing with. We know that it's an intelligence. This intelligence seems and appears to be very non-human, but it also appears to be a trickster, and it appears to be able to display itself to us in such a wide variety of ways that, I'm really not set on the idea that these are just disks from other star systems coming to visit us. Now, that might be the simple truth, but I just don't know. Your optimism that disclosure is at hand, is commendable. I think that's very cool. I don't feel the same way. I think that we're being messed with. And I feel like we've always been messed with. And I feel like we're no closer to disclosure because there's nothing to disclose, because it's the people that are experiencing stuff. Our governments of the world know almost as little as we do about this stuff. That's what it appears. They might know a little bit here, a little bit there. They might have a couple crafts, but ultimately, the big picture, I feel that everybody's in the dark. So I'm not as optimistic that disclosure is here. I think that acknowledgement is imminent, because essentially when you get enough people, the critical mass of people that come forward and talk about what they've seen and experienced, trained observers, pilots, astronauts, heads of FAA, ex-intelligence, former intelligence, but also current intelligence. I mean, come on. You get to a point where, and we hit that point all the way back in the 70s. Lee Spiegel showed me this album he put out, a UFO album, where he interviewed J. Allen Hynek, who flipped from being a UFO debunker for Project Blue Book to understanding that this phenomenon is real and non-human. And that was in the 70s. He has recordings of J. Allen Hynek. He's going to release this really cool audio album. So essentially my point is, it's already disclosed, man. Everything has been disclosed. The government can't disclose anything because it really doesn't know crap. So ultimately, it's up to us. It's up to callers. It's up to people that are going to come forward with their stories. And that's my bottom line.
I'm glad you used. There's a couple of things that you said that I really wholeheartedly agree with. Actually, I agree with everything, but really a few things I want to take out into and put out forward. First, acknowledgement is a much better than disclosure, because I think that's where we're getting at. I say this many times on several shows. Many of you listeners probably heard me say this several times. I highly doubt you're ever going to see POTUS, the President of the United States, stand on the White House lawn and say, "We have known for over 70 plus years that we've been visited by something. We don't know what. People have died. We've killed some people to silence them. We just thought you'd know." It's never going to happen that way. What's really going to happen is, like Jeremy just said, people out there are going to come forward and tell their stories. And another thing, Jeremy, you just said, skepticism. You have to be skeptic about everything, because there are hoaxers out there and there are things that are explainable. But,
right, so you have to be skeptical, but you also have to have your head on straight. I mean, look, like George Knapp, as I've said before, he's really mentored me. I feel very lucky that he's kind of taught me how to distinguish between the real and the unreal, and the hoaxsters and the not. I mean, he's really allowed me to not fall into some of the pitfalls, which I'm sure he's fell into. And so I have to thank him for that. And one thing that he said to me, he says, we can't be selective in the Lazar case. We need to look at the whole picture, all the evidence. We can't discard a truth simply because it does not fit nicely into our own theories. I see people do this all the time, and it's sad. And I think that, we can imply from that, you get people, and look, just because this has been happening, one of the main detractors is Stan Friedman, and the dude just won't look at the evidence. He just repeats what he's been saying for 25 years with no concept of the fundamental reality of new data. And it's just, honestly, it's sad. And I hope that everybody just kind of, grasps that you need to look at the whole picture. And if I've learned anything from George Knapp, it's been that. So, again, I just wanted to really put that out there that, this is what we need to be doing right now. We need to open this case up and look at it from the beginning.
Looking at everything with an open mind was one thing we have to do. Is you absolutely can't be looking at everything through a tunnel vision. You have to have an open mind, and you have to look at all the evidence. And remember this, everybody out there listening, all we need is one, just one. If one of those cases we prove to be extraterrestrial, then the case is over. That's it. You solved it. Of course, there are more questions. Where do they come from? What do they eat? What are they this and that? Before we go, we got a couple 5 minutes left. I want to go back to our caller, Mojo. Mojo, do you have any last questions for Jeremy?
I do. I really do. Jeremy, if you go to my YouTube channel, you're going to see some pretty interesting video. And what I want to share is that there's a history there. And that history I've actually seen the ETs. I've actually seen 3 types. So if you go to my channel, check it out. Who Took My Mojo? You might be, interested.
I'll check it out for sure. I appreciate the call.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Mojo. Who Took the Mojo, everybody? That's the channel. We will all check that out. Again, this is disclosure, acknowledgement as it's happening. People like him, the other guy from Pasadena, Jordan, I believe, Lou calling in, all the listeners, everybody tuning into this program right now. I think this is why we are living in a time that is more ripe for acknowledgement than ever. If you had told me in the 80s, or if you told somebody who was alive in the 50s that you'd be walking around on iPhones, you'd be blown away. You wouldn't listen. I mean, you'd think they're crazy out of their minds. Let me tell you this quick story because we're running down to the last couple minutes. What happened was there was a documentary I saw with John Lear. It was called Above Top Secret. And they talked about a crash and retrieval, and there was a surviving alien. And it had this little crystal tablet. And in it, it would link up telepathically, and it would see images and communicate with ships that were orbiting our planet and further in our solar system and even to its home planet. What does that look like now, 25 years later? An iPhone. The only difference is we're not linking to it telepathically, and we're not talking to ships that are in outer space. However, I'm sure you can connect to some NASA feed using your iPhone. Can you imagine what the military has? That was just a story I needed to share because times are changing so rapidly.
Yeah, they are. And it's very hopeful, Dr. J. I mean, one of the most amazing things is that we can get on a radio show like this and ask the public to contribute. And honestly, that's the most important thing to me is that, if you're fascinated by UFOs and ufology and the Bob Lazar case and anything that I have up at extraordinarybeliefs.com, if you're interested, if it makes you kind of stay up at night, right? If you're like, what are the big questions? What could the answers be? Then I encourage you to look into ufology. And again, it may go well beyond, alien spacecraft, the interconnectivity of all of these, what we call paranormal things in ufology. Maybe they're connected. There might be an intelligence, again, like I said earlier in the show, that is somehow toying with us. And these questions we're asking are kind of like the biggest questions. They're so much fun. So if you're not entertained, if it's not fun, you're not going to stick with it. So enjoy studying the unknown. And, again, as my mentor, George Knapp, has said before, it's, I'm probably going to butcher this, but, it's not our job, or a journalist's job, let's say, to explain the how does he say it? Because it's not our job to explain the uninvestigated, but to investigate the unexplained. And if we can do that, wow, We're going to open some doors.
Well said, Jeremy. It has been truly a fascinating show with you. We definitely have to continue this again. Everybody, extraordinarybeliefs.com. Before we go, don't forget, tune in. Right after this, Art Bell comes on. Let's just give some thanks to some important people. Of course, our guest again, Jeremy Kenyon Lockyer Corbell. Thank you very, very much for all your hard work out there. To all the Dr. J Radio Live team, there's too many names to list, but all of you out there, you know who you are. Thank you so much for your contribution. Of course, Keith Rowland for operating the station, darkmatterdigitalnetwork.com. And of course, the man himself, Art Bell, my inspiration, the guy who's coming on next, and the reason why I decided to become a vocal journalist in the sense of radio talk show. With that being said, everybody go to drjradiolive.com. You could see updates on the shows. You could see the next guests who are coming on. You could reach me through the contact page. And of course, you could catch all the old interviews via YouTube. I post them all. Again, like I said, there's some that haven't been posted. I've been a little slow to upload them because of the overwhelming work, but they all will be there. If there's one that you specifically want, keep pushing at it, and I will definitely get it out there for you. With that being said, thank you again, everybody. And extraordinarybeliefs.com, I wanted to instill that in your minds one last time. Patient 17 is a fantastic film that I saw that I truly, truly enjoyed. Jeremy, one last line, 20 seconds. What do you have to say about your website as we go?
Well, just that this is a continuous journey, and if you'll join me on the journey, I would like to weaponize your curiosity. Go to extraordinarybeliefs.com to learn more.
Thank you, everybody. drjradiolive.com. Art Bell next. This is Dr. J signing off.